I'm Jessica, and right now I'm the Executive Director of A.C.T United, which operates out of Carver County. And A.C.T is an acronym for Anti-Child Trafficking. And I'm a retired police officer from the Minneapolis Police Department and spent 12 years there. And half of those years I spent undercover and started off in narcotics investigations, but because of the overlap between narcotics and human trafficking and these child crimes, it wasn't long before human trafficking my first case had as a law enforcement officer, even though I had already understood the issue and knew about the issue. Got my first case when I was undercover in narcotics. So I was actually having some flashbacks today with all these wires and taps and stuff going on me. So I'm very comfortable. The more wires you put on me, the better. So it equals safety to me. That's good. So what I do now is I retired from law enforcement in 2014. And I was planning on just taking an early retirement, still had small kids at home. And then in 2015, I got a phone call from my former partner who was on the SWAT team too. And he does national training for law enforcement officers. And he knew what kind of training is out in our nation that was really good at the time and where we were lacking. And one of the places we were lacking was in human trafficking or juvenile sex trafficking training for our frontline cops. So investigations and frontline police work can be a little bit different. What you do at 4 o'clock in the morning with no resources and nobody working at the office is a lot different than investigations at 9 in the morning with a cup of coffee. So people were wanting me to come back for training. And he said, "Do you plan on retiring with all that information in your head?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I kind of did, actually." I kind of got a fishing trip planned. But however, that really sparked a good question for me, is did I plan on coming back? What did I care about? What was I going to do with what I'd seen, with what I'd heard, with everything I had known from working with youth for over 25 years, not just in law enforcement, but working with at-risk kids and teenagers for 25 years. And I decided to come back. But here's the deal. When I decided to come back into this game, there were two things that were important to me. First of all, I retired caring about two things, and that was cops and kids. So it was a passion of mine to make sure our kids and our youth are safe in our communities. But the other thing that I wanted to come back for was prevention. Because once you've responded to the crime, it's already happened. And if you've seen the kind of things that I've seen and others have seen, or if you've had family members or anybody in your community that's been impacted by these crimes, by the time you respond to it, there's a lot of damage that is done. So my goal became to come back in training our communities and training our churches, and also doing a lot of work in the schools with youth, which is actually my favorite thing to do, is to get in front of kids and be with kids and do prevention education. So that's what I came back to do, and that's what I do now, is a lot of prevention education. So I have a lot of information to get out to you today. I don't know who here has had human trafficking training before or any juvenile sex trafficking training before. Anybody been in a course for that?
Just your conference.
Of course. We got one, yeah. So what did you have it with by chance?
I don't remember, but it was
like an in-service deal?
No, it was we went to a training where a female who was in it, and then she's gotten out, kind of told us and stuff to look for.
Okay.
To be aware of her experiences.
Okay, yeah.
We also worked with our regional navigator from Rochester's.
Yeah. Okay.
I went to a conference that the whole weekend was about that. And
Okay.
spoke to people who have been trafficked.
Yeah. Okay. So, and typically when I'm doing training, there is kind of a span of where people are at. Some have never had any training about it before. Some actually volunteer or work with, in some capacity, with survivors or with youth, and are very familiar with it, and sometimes doing the work themselves. So what I try to do is give an overview. I stick around afterwards for questions, so that if something was glanced over that you want to learn more about, please see me, talk to me. We also are on YouTube, and on YouTube, our A.C.T United YouTube channel has a lot of videos from our past conferences and training, so that you can go deeper and get more information. We're also on Facebook, which gives out a lot of different training and events that are coming up throughout the state, the tri-state area. So if you need more information, I'll stick around, and our information is at the table too. So hopping right in to this issue. Now, one of the most important things to me, even though I was coming from Minneapolis when I started to get back into this, was our headquarters is in Carver County, Minnesota. And the reason why we're in Carver County, Minnesota, and not Minneapolis or not St. Paul is because when I was an investigator, and even pre and post all of that, I was very aware of the fact that in my conversations with kids, in my investigations, and even what I do now, talking with kids and doing our prevention curriculum in the schools, the kids know what's going on. But it was our suburban areas and our rural communities that didn't have that same awareness education to know what was happening with their students. Right now, 1 in 4 teens are going to meet their trafficker or a predator online. So when I was a kid, my parents told me, don't go to that location, don't go to that house, don't hang out with that person. It was all geographical where the danger kind of was. Well, now we have kids in every community, in every area that have a cell phone or some sort of electronic device, which now is giving them access to the whole world and the whole world access to them. So 1 in 4 are actually going to meet their trafficker online. So it isn't a matter of don't go there, it's a matter of being safe online as well. So we decided to stay in Carver County and to make sure that our suburban and rural areas were getting just as much education and awareness as the inner city was. And there's no group of kids that I've spoken to that I have not had a student come to me afterwards that needs help either for themselves or for somebody they know right now. That includes our Christian high schools that I'm in, that includes our private schools, that includes middle school, that includes high school, that includes our churches and our church youth groups. I just was at a large conference, 20,000 teens down in Minneapolis that had come from all over the nation that were all fabulous kids, a part of fabulous church youth groups all over the nation. And at the end of one of the sessions, a young lady came forward with 2 amazing parents, wonderful family, income, resources, and everything that you wouldn't expect to have this happen to. And she said to me, she's 16 years old, and she said, "Thank you very much for doing this, because I was just rescued by Homeland Security 10 months ago out of Mexico because I met a boyfriend, and that boyfriend and I had a relationship, and he said we should travel, and before she knew it, she had left home with her awesome boyfriend and found herself in Mexico and involved in sex trafficking and being sold there." So it was a joint effort and jurisdictions to get her back. This was a, wonderful teen, living life one day with a fabulous family and good grades at school in a suburban area and going to church, and found herself in Mexico being sold because of relationships. So it's important that all of us are informed and aware in all our communities. So what is happening out there? What's happening is crimes of sexual exploitation against children and youth. It is targeting our young people. The 2 crimes that are the fastest growing in the world right now, one is a cybercrime called sextortion. We're not talking about that today, but that is the sexually explicit images, photos, and videos that kids are sending back and forth between each other, and then also sending them online, and it's not turning out and not panning out to be, let's just say, what they expected it to be, and they're being put in pornography. So that is the crime of sextortion. What we're talking about today, the other thing that's happening, is juvenile sex trafficking. And these crimes are targeting down to grade school. We'll talk about a little bit later about how victimization of sex trafficking is anywhere from infancy to young adults. That's the age range of the victims that we're seeing. With these 2 crimes, and being the fastest growing, what are the effects of these crimes? Now, this is where communities or teachers or social workers might start seeing something, right? The effects of these crimes are absolutely devastating. There's physical effects. A lot of abuse happens. There's a lot of violence and threats of violence. There's mental health effects. There's academic effects. We see academics going down, youth that are being affected by this crime, their academics are going down, they're being tardy, they're missing school, some will eventually drop out. Social consequences in their life, negative impact socially, they're becoming isolated. We're seeing depression, PTSD in almost 100% of the cases. So here we have the fastest growing crime targeting our young people, and the effects of these crimes are very manifold and severe. You would think they'd be running to tell somebody, right? Like, help me, the first person that they see, or when they come back home, or when they get to school, or when they get to church, or they see a police officer. You would think they're saying, help me immediately. But that is not the case. They are keeping it secret. There's a lot of isolation and secrecy. And there's reasons for that. Some of the reasons for that is because of the nature of this crime. A lot of times we think, and we still think, that this crime begins with kidnapping. And if it begins with kidnapping, then we would expect or anticipate that that person, in an attempt to escape, or if they were able to escape, would flag down the first person they saw and say, help me, right? But the avenue, the most common avenue into sex trafficking is grooming through relationship. So by the time they're in this relationship, they already have this emotional bond, they have this connection, they have dependence, drugs are introduced, and so you've got drug addiction, you've got dependence on those drugs, you've got fear from violence and threats of violence. There's a lot of violence that occurs in this crime toward them, in front of them on purpose, to let them know, if you tell, this is what is going to happen to you as well. So they're not coming forward. So if it's so bad and they're not going to tell, what can we possibly do? Well, prevention education is one of the best things and the top thing that we need to start investing in. We need to start investing in a model of prevention that is going to educate our kids, equip and empower our kids, because they're the ones that are targeted. So all the adults in the room and all the adults in the community can get together and we can learn about this and talk about this. But youth are the ones being targeted, so they're the ones that need to know not only what is going on, and trust you me, they already know what's going on. It's us that need to catch up a little bit. Not only do they need to know what's going on, but what does it look like? Because we typically tend to do better training and teaching our kids how to stay safe on campus, at school, don't go out at dark, walk in groups, hold your keys in your hand, different self-defense things that are going to protect them, definitely, from other crimes. But are we teaching them what that relationship looks like? What are those words and behaviors that are building relationship with you, that are grooming you toward control and exploitation and abuse? And that's what prevention education does. It teaches them not just what is happening out there, watch your back, but here's how it's happening, so watch your relationships. That's the important key in prevention education with our kids. And our particular program does several things beyond that, and we'll talk about it later. So let's talk about the problem and the issue. Juvenile sex trafficking pretty much is this: is anybody that does anything to induce or recruit or force a person under the age of 18 to commit or to do commercial sex acts. Well, what does that term mean? It means that there is a young person that is for sale for something of value, and a third-party person is reaping the benefits or benefiting from, profiting from the sale of that person, that human being, that human life, right? Minnesota, we've typically known this happens way far away. We've been to Thailand. My daughter just got back from Thailand. ACT United does have some international connections where we help support other rescues and ministries and organizations out there. So it is happening in other places, but is it happening here? That's our question. Well, the Minnesota Judicial Branch that handles all our criminal cases as well as some civil cases, but speaking of our criminal cases in the state of Minnesota, we are third highest in the nation for cases of child sexual exploitation crimes. We also have it in every county of Minnesota. The judicial branch, law enforcement, the criminal justice system has had cases of sex trafficking in every county in Minnesota. About 12,000 people are trafficked in Minnesota every year. And a study in 2010, so our public awareness is catching up, but there's people that have known about this for quite a long time. In 2010, they found that over 200 minors under the age of 18 are sold for commercial sex purposes over the internet. Within the last couple of years, the Washington County Prosecutor's Office started seeing an influx of cases, so they actually assigned somebody to take a look at this issue and found that that number of children for sale on the internet triples on holidays like St. Patrick's Day. Anytime that there is a party-related holiday or drinking or large gatherings of people, entertainment type, part of the entertainment is actually looking for minors for commercial sex work. The sex trafficking pipeline is just the fact that if you've been involved in this for any length of time, you know that for over 40 years now, Midwestern teenagers and children have been driven and trafficked in New York and been brought back and forth between New York and Minnesota for over 40 years because of the market in New York for Midwestern kids. Our Midwestern area also has a particular market, but that's how we got the name pipeline. A 2016 study of Minneapolis cases of juvenile sex trafficking over a 4-year period found that the victims ranged in age from 4 to 17 years old. Now, the jurisdiction for prosecution was Minneapolis, but what I want to make clear and everybody aware is when you look at these cases, Minneapolis had the jurisdiction over the case. So it was a Minneapolis case, right? But that's because either the transaction or the trafficking took place in Minneapolis or it was discovered in Minneapolis, so there was a link. But when you took a map of all of Minnesota and you plotted and pinpointed where the victims came from, where the traffickers came from, and where, here's somebody we don't talk about, where the buyers came from, they plotted all over the whole map of Minnesota. And research in Minnesota, in cooperation with the University of Minnesota Research and the Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force, found that people in rural county Minnesota are willing to drive 60 miles to purchase a minor for commercial sex. So, Minneapolis case involving people from all over our state. So who's involved? In order for sex trafficking to happen, we need to have 3 people. And we need to have the trafficker, the person that's building that relationship, that is recruiting that young person, that's building that trust and that bond and that control and that relationship. And then we have the youth, the person that is going to be exploited or is exploited. And then we have the buyer, the least talked about person in the scenario. But his box is the biggest, and sometimes there's hers as well, he and she, but mostly he's, have the biggest box because for every one trafficker, that trafficker can have up to a dozen youth that they are exploiting, and for every one youth that they are exploiting, there can be 10 to 20 buyers a day willing to come and to buy that young person in this form of exploitation. So here's 4 pictures here that I like to show. Knowing that we need 3 people, got to have a trafficker, we got to have a youth, and we got to have a buyer in order for sex trafficking to occur. Looking at these 4 pictures and just kind of putting in your mind who we might think is who at this point, right? So I see nervous faces too, like the quiz is coming, but I'm just going to tell you the answer. We won't guess. All 4 of these are convicted traffickers in the state of Minnesota. All 4 of them have been convicted of sex trafficking. So the lady in the glasses to my far left is a grandmother in rural county farm, Minnesota, and she was sex trafficking her 8-year-old granddaughter to a registered sex offender in Iowa. Next to her is your average looking guy who was a part of helping transport sex trafficking people that were being sex trafficked and exploited in the state of Minnesota, making sure that they got to the right hotel and to the right house and to the right apartment. And this guy right here is awesome because what he did, he's from Chicago, and so he knows traffickers are very intentional. He knew where young people hang out in Chicago, so he went to where young people hang out, and he saw a 15-year-old girl on the street looking lonely, looking alone, and she was, and they're very good at picking up on these cues. And he made contact with her, and he said, "It looks like you need to get on your feet. Would you like to be a part of the family?" Of course I would, right? Home life wasn't that good, so she would run from home often thinking anything's got to be better than what's happening at home. Well, it wasn't better. It was this guy, and he picked up on all those cues. So when we think about our youth, a lot of times they'll say, well, we don't have kidnappings here, so it must not be happening here. But when we see it doesn't happen, kidnapping does happen, just to be clear, it does happen for a lot of reasons, but it does happen for sex trafficking purposes as well. But it is the least likely entrance or avenue into sex trafficking for our minors. The most common and most likely avenue is through relationships. So he says, do you want to be a part of the family? That's something she's not reporting. That's not something she's running from. That's something she's running to, right? So she hops in the car. There's another young lady in the car. They drive up to Minnesota, and they get to Minnesota, rent a hotel, and that's when she finds out that being a part of the family really means her involvement in sex trafficking. And so they post her for sale online, and she's sold. And when she decides that she does not want this anymore, she did not think this is what was going to happen if she hopped in the car, she says no, she resists, and she ends up getting assaulted pretty badly, and was left unconscious and then found walking down I-94 early in the morning, and somebody on their way to work saw her, picked her up, brought her to the hospital in St. Paul, and she disclosed the story and was able to get help. And this young lady here was a senior in high school at the time when she noticed a younger student with developmental disabilities at school that didn't have a lot of friends and ate lunch alone, wasn't well connected, very marginalized. And so she became her friend, and then became her best friend, and then started hanging out with her after school. And then in the course of that relationship, started introducing a better way out and a better life and a better way we could go. And started talking to her about prostitution and escorting, and nothing bad will really happen. And so she started selling that young person or exploiting that young person for profit. So what is our point with understanding this? That it happens most likely by relationships. So we need to be talking to our kids about relationships. Traffickers can be male or female. They can be peers the same age, or they can be a part of gangs or the occult. Gangs will recruit you in. Occults you're usually born into, and sex trafficking happens. And they can be family members. They can even be biological family members. And like we learned, they can be grandmas, and they can be foster parents, but they can be biological parents as well. And here is the photo of how sex trafficking starts. So usually a lot of our marketing materials will have things that look more bondage, and there's a reason for that, because there is bondage. I'm not telling for a reason, but my bondage isn't physical. My bondage is mental. It's mental fear, mental threats, and the violence that keeps me silent and keeps me secret. But you may see me in a relationship because my bondage is not physical. The youth range in age, like I said, talking about the youth now, range in age from infants to young adults. And here's something that at ACT United we are very passionate and intentional about, and we have a class and we have a seminar related to the sexual exploitation of men and boys. Because most of our materials, most of what we talk about is girls that are victimized. Most of our services and resources are all for women and girls. But we know that 36% of trafficked minors in the United States are boys. And actually 50% of victims of sextortion, which is thinking you're sending a sexual risky photo to a friend, but really it's somebody with a fake profile set up and now they've put you in pornography. 50% of minors that fall for that online are boys. So boys are also impacted by this. They need our prevention education just as much as the girls. And it can be any ethnicity, culture, economic status. We've seen this in every community. Nobody is really exempt from it. Some areas have higher prevalence than others, but nobody is exempt. So a couple of common vulnerabilities that we do see, and this is where prevention work also becomes really important, because if we know what happens upstream, that's where we're able to go to make sure this doesn't happen. That's the whole reason I was even willing to come back to do anything about this, is if I've already been here and I've already seen who's involved in this, how does this happen, why does this happen, I've seen all three people, I've interviewed all three people, I've been in the room with victims, I've been in the room with buyers, now, you know, curled up in a ball and all the wishes I wouldn't have, right? And I've also interviewed the traffickers and sat there with their arrogance and their business plan and their business scheme and how much money they make, which they make sure to remind me is 4 times more than I did, right, in a given month, right? I've interviewed them all. So if I've seen this and I've seen the effects, my job is to go way back here and to go upstream and help us see what are the vulnerabilities that we need to fill. What are the gaps that we can fill so that we can start ripping targets off of our kids' backs. And also work in prevention for buyers and traffickers, which we're not talking about so much today. But there are things that we can do in prevention in all 3 areas. Remember, let me just say this. Remember that every 35-year-old trafficker, every 60-year-old trafficker, every 29-year-old trafficker was once a 6-year-old boy, was once a young man, was once a young woman. So what happened in their upstream that created such deprivation or such lack of regard for humanity, for another person, and for children? What happened to them here? Everybody has the preceding story, right? So how we do our youth ministry, how we do our youth programs at church, how we help with homelessness, how we help with all the issues that young people experience, if we start filling those gaps and taking care of those vulnerabilities, we are literally ripping targets off their back. Because what a predator does is looks for the target. If you display a vulnerability in any way, I'm glad to fill it for you. That becomes my inroad to our relationship. And our relationship then becomes my tactic for control, abuse, and exploitation. So we're going to end sex trafficking if we get ahead of it with our prevention programs for our children and our teens, taking those targets off. So what are some of those common things? Homelessness, missing from home, runaways, unstable home life, okay? Being a part of the foster care system, social service contact. If they've already have contact in those kind of systems, they're at a greater risk than other youth. A history of sexual abuse that has not had counseling or proper care to reestablish those boundaries. What's okay for me and what's not okay for me. So when youth are coming forward with mental health issues or abuse issues, getting them the proper care right away is also going to prevent them from future harm and future experiences. Financial poverty, which is also related to, you know, kind of our homelessness. Or if your vulnerability is the need for food, shelter, clothing, I'll become that. A trafficker will become anything you need. And then another thing that doesn't get, you know, we talk about this a little bit here and there, but I make it a bullet point. Emotional poverty. Emotional poverty. If I'm a predator or I'm a trafficker and I'm online, guess what the most popular online app is for predators? Whatever's the most popular for teens. And if that changes tomorrow, I'll be there too. So whatever's most popular with youth is most popular for predators. And I'm on there. And I'm looking for things like feeling really depressed today. Nobody likes me. Nobody cares about me. Sick of not having any friends. My dad's never around. My mom don't care about me. I'm looking for these vulnerabilities, these emotional vulnerabilities, low self-esteem. I'm looking at your photos. Do you look like somebody that's insecure, low self-esteem, trying to impress online? I'll tell you you're beautiful for free, right? I'll tell you you look good. I'll say anything I need to say to start building that relationship. So emotional poverty, allowing our kids to feel connected, cared for, valued, loved, worth it, a hope for their future. You know, these things like end sex trafficking, I need to be Homeland Security, right? No, end sex trafficking, make kids feel connected, valued, and have a hope for their future, right? That builds the confidence. Educate them about relationships. That helps them to keep themselves safe. Drug addiction, as the opioid crisis increases, we're seeing increases in family trafficking because of the need for drug money. When you have nothing left, you still got your kids, and there's a market for kids, unfortunately. Marginalized groups and people we talked about, you know, the left out, the lonely at school. And no prevention education. That's something that any kid can have from any area, any home, anywhere. No prevention education means that they're checking their back when they're walking after school or in the dark or, you know, walking from the mall in the parking lot, right? They're watching their back because we've done a good job at that. But without prevention education that says, here's what healthy relationships look like and what they should look like. Here's the signs and indicators of those words and those behaviors that are grooming you for control, grooming you for abuse. These are the things that are not okay in relationships. And our prevention education also talks to kids about the law. Did you know that's their number one question is, what is the law? I want to know if I get in trouble. If somebody's harming me and they've convinced me that I'm horrible and that I'm a part of it and I'm just as much responsible because we're in this together, you know, this is our relationship, you're going to JDC, you know, if you tell. So they want to know, what is the law and is it designed to protect me? So prevention education is going to answer those kids' questions that they have, which is going to give them more confidence to tell. So best practices for intervention and prevention, because harm does occur. So what are a couple of things we can have in our pocket if somebody does disclose to us? And then of course, how are we going to end this? We'll talk a little bit about prevention concretely. So what can we do? Ask. One of my colleagues, who is the nurse manager for the emergency department at Mayo Clinic, her and I have done different trainings together for nurses and law enforcement and some other places. One of the things that when they were able to identify somebody that came in as a victim of sexual exploitation into the emergency room, after being able to interdict and get help or whatever, one of the number one things the survivors were saying is, I wish somebody would have asked me. And it was really heartbreaking when she heard somebody say, I thought for sure you'd know because you were a nurse. I thought nurses, doctors, police, you know, certain people knew everything, right? And she was waiting for somebody to ask, can I help you? Is everything okay? Too scared to initiate that, but wished somebody would have asked her. Now, will they tell you? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the trafficker's around the corner. Maybe trafficker's mom, right? But the more people that are saying it, the more we're building confidence and we're planting those seeds. So don't hesitate to ask, is everything okay? Can I help you? Is there anything you need? Just an open-ended question that doesn't say, you know, you don't want to say, are you being abused right now currently, and can I call the police? You know, it's a little intimidating, scary, way too far at first. How can I help you? You look like you could use some help. Is there anything I can do? Right? Allowing them to disclose what they want and possibly get some help. Signs and indicators of an exploited or a trafficked youth. Now, there's different indicators depending upon who you are. Now, when I'm with my law enforcement family, we have different things we need to talk about because we're doing a traffic stop at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's different. When I'm talking to the medical field, that's different because you have a patient and you have complaints that they're coming in with and you're having injuries and different behaviors. That's different. These are for people that have youth in their life. Like if you have contact with youth in any way, these are the things that you might notice. One is they have a new controlling friend or boyfriend. And don't always be looking for the guy. Don't be looking for the controlling new guy friend all the time. Sometimes it's the controlling new girlfriend. And it's a young man we're talking about, or a controlling new best friend girl, female, to a female teenager. So, but a controlling person or friend in their life, they get a cell phone, or now they have 2 cell phones, because traffickers always want immediate connection and communication. Chronic runaway or missing, they start missing for periods of time. You know, not like taken and now in Romania for 5 years or anything like that, but now there's a pattern of disappearing. Like gone on the weekends but comes back for school Monday, or gone for a week and then comes back and says, yeah, I ran away, I just stayed with friends, and no big deal, quit being so mad at me, right? Because fear of disclosure, they're not going to tell you. But now they're starting to have these patterns of disappearing for periods of time. Unexplained absences or overly tired in class. That's a good one for our teachers if they start noticing some differences in the academic environment. You know, grades are slipping, not doing as well, tardy but going to class. And that's the thing, when we understand it's not a kidnapping, gone, taken scenario, and we see that these youth are still coming back home once in a while, they're still going to school, at least for a period of time, and they're still going to church, and they're still in our communities, then we see it is important for us to have our eyes and ears open and to see the signs of our family members, even the youth that are in our community. A dramatic change in behavior or appearance, so like a sudden marked change, and not like got a skateboard for Christmas and now I wear Vans all the time, like not a normal dramatic change, because teens change all the time, but something that may be more sensual or sexual in appearance, brand new stuff outside of their normal financial means, and dramatic change in behavior. Used to be outgoing, hang out with everybody, and now they're more isolated, withdrawn, depressed, things like that. You'll see that, and you'll see anxiousness, paranoid or fearful. Used to be kind of chill, and now it's like, did you hear a door? Or who's coming into the room, who's leaving the room, who just pulled up outside? That was the cop in me when I heard something out there, but all these sudden noises, who's out there? But you'll see that too. Especially some paranoia over the cell phone, because there's a high level of control with these particular crimes. So you will answer by the first ring, you'll answer my text message within 60 seconds, and so they're always wondering where the phone is, and answering right away. Signs of physical abuse. Don't be deceived or fall for myths that this is somehow Miss Kitty at Gunsmoke. This is not a sexual transaction between 2 consenting adults, okay? This is violence and fear and abuse of a minor, both at the hands of the trafficker and the buyer. Most buyers, on average speaking now, most buyers are middle-aged men. Most have college education, most work full-time, most have a medium to upper income bracket, most are married, and most have children, including children the same age as the ones they're willing to drive 60 miles to pay a trafficker to be with for half hour. So if I'm married, or I have a girlfriend and I have kids and I have lots of money and I have a full-time job and I have a nice house and everything's going well, why am I driving 60 miles to go purchase somebody 13 years old somewhere else? Because I'm not buying sex, I'm buying control. I'm buying the ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want for that 30 minutes that I paid my money for. So this is not prostitution. This is not a mutually beneficial business arrangement when we're talking about sex trafficking of anybody, but especially of minors. A new tattoo starting or increasing in their drug or alcohol use, because drugs and trafficking will go hand in hand, and unaccounted for financial resources. So again, you see all of a sudden I've got a whole bunch of new stuff and it's inconsistent with my financial means. So if you see, don't hesitate to call or text if you believe somebody is in immediate danger or you need a police officer to see something. So many times people would say, well, I didn't know for sure if it was. Well, if you've got enough little indicators there and it's abnormal for your neighborhood, it's abnormal for your neighbor, it's abnormal for what you know to be true about this family member, if it rises to the level, don't hesitate to call if you believe somebody's in danger. But you can also, if you suspect human trafficking, you can always make a report 24/7 to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They're excellent. They take your information, you can be anonymous or not. They will see if it rises to the level of reporting it to authorities, and they'll do that for you. So they're kind of like a middle ground between you and the determination if this should go to law enforcement. So don't hesitate to use that number, and it's on the back of my card if you grab that. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a great place for resources. So if you're going to help somebody, and if you're going to help talk to your kids and your grandkids and people in your community, remember one of the number one questions youth have is, what is the law? I want to know, do I get in trouble? Do I get arrested? How will I be treated? Understanding legal process is important, because in a kid's mind, if I tell, they picture themselves like on the stand tomorrow, like facing this person, right? And that's scary, and that doesn't help. That they don't want to tell if that's the scenario. So if we have a little bit of confidence and a little bit of understanding about how it's going to go, then we're going to be better advocates for kids when we say tell someone. Because, and here's the thing is, I always encourage kids to tell, of course, right? I always encourage them to tell. But in our prevention program, we lead small groups in the schools and the churches, and here's what they talk about in small group when there's just a little few of us is, what does it look like if I tell? Because it's easy to say, tell somebody. I'm going, and then what, right? Then what happens? So understanding what the legal process is going to look like for them a little bit even will help. Minnesota, this is the great thing about doing the majority of my training in Minnesota is we are one of the leading states in the nation when it comes to our laws and our protections for youth. We have the Minnesota Safe Harbor Law for Youth, and it did a couple of amazing things that federal law was not doing for us. And one of those things is it decriminalized the youth that are being trafficked. So it used to be you'd be arrested for prostitution. Now you are not arrested for prostitution or any role or in any way that you are involved in sex trafficking. So you are not criminalized, you're not a defendant, you're not arrested, you don't go to JDC, right? And that is huge, because that was one of those control tactics that predators had, was you will go to jail. You were the one in the room. So that's not the case. Minnesota law is really good. The other thing it did is we don't have to prove that anybody knew your age at the time. That was incredibly difficult to do, to prove that this buyer knew you were 14 years old when he walked in the room. You're not being ID'd. And you're told to say you're 18 or 19 or 20. So it was really hard to prove. And people were doing what they want, when they want. People would come forward and we couldn't do anything about it unless we could prove they knew that. Under Minnesota law, we don't have to prove that. It just has to be a matter of fact that you were 14 at the time. We don't care what he or she knew or we could prove, right? So that's very, very helpful. So what did it do in Minnesota? It decriminalized the young person. It released victim services to them up to age 24. So now they are victims and they are survivors. They are not criminals. They are not a part of that. And it helped increase our prosecution and our sentencing. So now we're able to bring justice to this side and resources and help to this side. So that's kind of a super quick 101 to help build confidence in Minnesota and how well we do it here. And if you talk to people, I'm still amazed, because if I go to trainings or I go to other states and other places and I hear what they have to deal with, it makes me even more thankful to be here in Minnesota, from a law enforcement side as well as from a victim side. So responding to disclosure, there's a list of things up here. I just want to highlight a couple of things. If you get the privilege or the honor of being the person that somebody trusts to tell you what is happening, remember a couple things. remember that safety is the first priority. Because if my life is in danger, a lot of times there's threats against me, but there could also be threats against my family members. I know that your mom is a single mom. I know when your dad leaves for work. I know you got in one of my cases, it was a 12-year-old girl that was being trafficked by her 24-year-old stepbrother. And he would say, remember, you start saying no, you've got an 8-year-old brother. So for protection for him, she didn't tell. So safety is the first priority. Where do I go when I'm done talking to you, right? Because right now it's informational to you, but real life is in about an hour for me. You know, when you're done talking to me and my pop is gone, and where do I go? So always remember, safety is the number one priority. And second, belief. Belief. I've seen horrific things. Anybody that's been in this work has seen and heard horrific things. It could seem like unbelievable. And the things that happen can be very unbelievable, but believe at first, because if we're wanting to trust somebody, we're going to pop out a little bit. We're going to see how you respond to it, right? How do you treat me hearing that? Do you believe me when I say that? Because if you don't even believe that, why am I going to keep talking and tell you any more? So believe at first. And then if there's any exaggeration or false claims or false allegations or anything like that, they'll weed themselves out. It'll become clear in time, but believe first. So safety is the number one priority. Believe what you hear first. Use open-ended questions, and there's a lot of free classes now on trauma, which I highly recommend, because, and I know just from the law enforcement perspective that the same signs and indicators that you are lying to me are the same signs of trauma. They can look exactly the same. So understanding trauma is going to make us better at being helpful, make us better at how we ask our questions, all of us, you know, not just law enforcement, everybody. So I highly recommend finding a free class on that online. And know that the best policy for working and helping is together. That really takes I actually have a slide on that actually. This is what it looks like to help somebody that has been exploited in this. We're going to need everybody to work together, because this has impacted me mentally. I'm going to have mental health issues. I'm going to have medical concerns, possible pregnancy I might be worried about, or sexually transmitted diseases. A lot of times, over 80% will have a concussion that went untreated. Broken bones, there's going to be burns and different physical injuries. Also drug treatment, I may have to go through withdrawal, so we're going to have to work well there. Our shelters, our churches and our faith communities, we're really going to, and working with our legal team. If you have anything in you that says, I don't like working with churches, or I don't like working with law enforcement, or I don't trust the medical community, this would be the time to let that down, so that this person can have whole care and have everything they need and be really free to get on that road to health and healing, okay? And let them drive it and direct it. I can't say enough. I get one of my hangry-crangry flashbacks when I think about some of the divisiveness out there, because I had somebody that had called from the hospital and wanted to talk to police. I want to make a report. I have to talk to police. So they called the police, and here came me. And she's in the room. I want to talk to police. Well, the medical community had decided that it was re-traumatizing to talk to police. And she's in the room going, I need to talk to police. They finally let me in the room. Well, I had to call my supervisor to tell me not to make my way into places and convince me not to do things, but said, give me patience. So I did. Get let in the room. Oh, goody. So now I'm face to face with her, and the nurse kept saying, you don't have to talk if you don't want to. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Keep in mind, this is somebody begging for police. Well, she ended up not talking because of the nurse's advice. And I ended up finding out later that the reason she was so adamant about talking to police is because this was a serial rapist and she knew it, and he had disclosed to her where he was going next, and she knew there were other victims, and she was desperately wanting to make sure this didn't happen to anybody else, but somebody else had decided it was re-traumatizing to talk to police. So if my concern is medical, if I want to know if I'm pregnant or I need medical care first, let's do it. But if I decide I'm talking to the police first or the cops first, and we can worry about the drug thing and we can worry about medical later, do it. They know the situation. They know how they feel. They know what they need. They know what should come first. So let them drive where we go when helping somebody. So here's where I end. Right here is on prevention education. And you probably noticed that when I talk about prevention, that's where, you know, I start jumping around and moving around more and realizing I have a certain span and a booby trap over here that I need to be careful of. But prevention education is the way to go. So this is one tool. If you have another in your community or anywhere for prevention education for youth on sexual exploitation, you know, please advocate for that or whatever. This is one tool. This is our curriculum. We do have, I mean, it's backed by, it's successful and it's backed by a lot of research and a lot of stuff, so it's really good. But it's called Youth Aware Teen Exploitation Prevention Program. We're in the middle schools, the high schools, Christian high schools, church youth groups, organizations that work with youth, the Explorers, Junior Explorers, anywhere that is serving our teens. And what our program does is it has 3 steps. This is what is unique about us. First of all, we give the real inclusive story. And the real inclusive story is that it isn't just our girls, it's our boys. And it isn't just our inner cities, it's our suburbs and our rural communities. So everybody has a voice, everybody's represented in what we talk about. Because imagine yourself being a young man that has been sexually exploited, which is 1 in 6, by the way, before the age of 18 will experience sexual assault, abuse, or exploitation before the age of 18. Imagine being a young man that's being sexually exploited, and every speaker that comes in, every woman that talks, everybody that says something says, boys keep doing this crime and girls are the victims. Where's your story? Where's your representation? Talk about a barrier, right? I'm in a society or I'm in a community or I'm hearing messages that say there's something wrong with me, because apparently this don't happen to me, and that's not the case. We know 36% of trafficked minors are boys, right? Because we talked about that. And 1 in 6 will experience some form of sexual abuse or exploitation before the age of 18. So we make sure that we do that. But we define our 3 steps. The first step is we come in and do an awareness presentation to the students. So we do prevention education. We define exploitation. What is explicit photo sharing? What is the consequences of that? What are youth who have experienced that saying? And what is sex trafficking and how does that happen? So that you're looking for those behavioral signs and those red flags and the signs and behaviors that are leading to that abuse and exploitation. We talk about internet safety. If we have time, we have a peer survivor video where another teenager who was sex trafficked talks about her experience, how it happened, and through a relationship, and then importantly, how she got out, which actually was by another teenager that noticed the signs because of his prevention training and helped her get out. And we talk about the law, because remember, kids want to know that. And if we're in other states, we talk about that state's law, so that part is modified for wherever we go. And when and how to get help for you or a friend. And importantly, we talk about what youth are doing themselves to help be advocates and leaders in ending sexual exploitation. And if we think back just a little bit, it can be something like having lunch with a marginalized person, right? Grab your friend and go sit with that person that doesn't have anybody to sit with at lunch. So we encourage them, because although they're targeted, that also makes them part of the solution. So we help equip them to be the leaders and the advocates. And then if the school or the church want, we'll come back and we'll do a student small group breakout. And for 4 weeks over lunch, we meet. We go deeper on the topics. Kids are asking questions. They're asking questions about right now. about real life situations. They're asking questions about their friend, their sibling, and themselves. And that's really where we're able to interdict on some crimes that are currently happening with some of these kids, but also where we see our prevention success stories coming forward too. And then step 3 is students from that group, if they want to, they design and lead their own awareness project for their school, their community, or their group. Maybe they'd come in here and they would give a presentation on something. We've had kids do something like that before. And this is just some photos of past stuff. This is Patrick Henry High School in North Minneapolis. We had 10 kids that set up a booth and a game and some information and resources. They were able to make contact with 500 other students in North Minneapolis. And let me tell you what kids know that we don't know. They know who's who. So they were like, you, come over here, right? They knew who to call to the table. They knew who to give information. They knew who to give the help bracelet to. That has, we give out bracelets that on the inside have the helpline embossed, so nobody even knows it's there. On the outside, it just says United We Win. But on the inside, nobody knows, so no matter where you are, you could flip it, get that number, and get help right away. So kids leading the way is really the way to go. They're the ones there on Friday night, right? Not us. They're the ones at school every day, not us. They're the ones that should be the voice and the hands and the feet of awareness and prevention and advocating for safety. And these kids did a benefit concert, so we've had elaborate stuff that kids have done as well. We have online safety for kids. So these students are middle school and high school students that were a part of our Youth Aware program, and what they want to do, how they want to give back in awareness, is teach the younger kids in our online safety class. So we had teenagers write the skits to give the information so that all students in these grade school levels, no matter what their attention span was, like super low like me, or super high, or whatever their learning style was, all of them stayed engaged. So what are some next 15 seconds of next steps? Advocate for prevention education. I think that's where I would probably land the most, is advocate for prevention education. If you have other groups or churches or community forums or anything that you believe this would be important information to get to our hospitals, our social services, everybody, advocate for that education so that we all have our eyes and ears open. They're not going to tell, but if we sometimes one question, noticing one thing can make the world of difference for a kid. And remember, sometimes it's their parents, so that really does make us the front line. When it's not mom or dad, it's really us. So be aware ourselves, and also advocate for it in your school districts and your churches to get prevention education to the teenagers and to the students. Because we don't end something by responding to it. We end it by getting ahead of it and teaching our kids, educating them, equipping them, and empowering them to be confident and know what to do and when to get help. So advocate for that. More information about us, we have some stuff on the table. We're on Facebook and we're on YouTube, and everything we do for the schools, we never charge, we never let cost be a barrier. We work on grants, we work on donations, we work on people that say, this is what I want to invest in, the future children and teens, that's where I'm investing. So we never let cost be a barrier. So if you want to sponsor, support, or donate to Act United to keep us with the kids, please do that. And email me with any other questions or if I can help in any other way. So thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to this topic. It's not what any community wants to talk about, but unfortunately it happens, and so if our eyes and ears are open, we will truly make a difference. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What we usually do now is go into our local meeting, and I thought I would kind of change it because I'd like to hear from our local police, and if we have any deputies here, what's going on in the area, either this, when you're noticing, or what else is. You guys, this is when you get to ask questions.
So locally on this topic, there was a new law that was brought in place about training hotels to identify sex trafficking. So we've worked with our hotels, not only getting our local police department involved with their employees so that they're comfortable knowing who they're going to report to, but some of the things that they see. And I think it was the Department of Health came on the video that they watch, and we help them try to answer questions and try to identify some of those things. So, how much has this affected Cannon Falls? We have had victims that have lived here. We've never been able to identify that the acts happened here, but they were taken other places. It definitely concerns us the second that we hear that somebody didn't come home. It's like, okay, who are they hanging out with? So we're trying to access their social media. We always want parents to be involved with their kids' social media. If their kids will allow them to have their passwords and have access, or the kids log into a device at home and it stays logged in so that they can see who they're communicating with. Unfortunately, kids are very smart. Even my 15-year-old has made how many Google accounts and how many Instagram accounts, and she can't even keep up with it. But that's how they take advantage, is they just keep sending out, trying to get in touch with these kids to be that friend. So it's unfortunate. Does anybody have any questions specifically?
What about our local hospital? I know Mayo down in Rochester has that nurse, but what
So like the same nurse?
yeah,
So they have sexual assault nurses?
yeah.
We don't have one here. There is one in Red Wing and then Rochester. Typically we have our victims go to Rochester. That's where their best treatment is going to be. And then we have the Hope Coalition, which is located in Red Wing, but we have our Youth Advocate, which is in Cannon Falls Schools, that interacts with kids, trying to identify any issues in the schools. So they would be the source for advocacy for our victims. So some other things, I know we usually talk about some of the fraud things that have happened in town. So in the last month, we had a couple interesting ones. One of them was somebody saying that they were a business in Cannon Falls and just calling people saying, hey, you haven't paid your bill, we can just take a credit card over the phone or your checking account. And they're like, well, that's weird. I paid my bill. No, I don't think so. So they called and let us know. So if a business in Cannon Falls is calling you to make a payment, it's okay to hang up and then call the business. So now a twist to that was another business got a call from a guy saying, why are you calling me asking about my social security? They're like, we didn't. So they're spoof dialing using the business's phone number, not representing as the business, but said, we're with Social Security. So that we've seen quite a bit with other businesses too. So they get the call back saying, well, I'm calling the cops on you because you guys are trying to fraud me. Well, that's not to say somebody at the business couldn't be doing that, but that's typically not the case. So just be aware of that. And then our last one was, so when somebody gets arrested, a family member can call this company and put money on people's books in jail. So there's no doubt that this child of this parent was in jail, and this company called saying, hey, he's in jail and he wants you to put money on his books, let's give your credit information. The kicker is the company doesn't reach out to people. So it'd be easy for a fraudster to go see who's on the jail roster, try to find who their family members are, because there's easy resources to figure out who family members are. Call them up and say, hey, let's put some money on the books, get credit information, and now charge and do whatever they want. So anytime anybody, I don't care if it's your grandkid or your kids or your significant other, hey, give me your credit card information over the phone. I'm pretty sure my wife has never asked for that. And I'm going to go, you know what? I don't know if this is you. I'm going to call you back, because the grandparent scam is still going on. It happens monthly that I hear about within our county. Give us a call. We can help verify stuff. It's pretty rare that somebody's going to call asking for bail money. We can usually look it up online and figure it out.